Slides. So I called this 5 questions about systemic risk, but Elizabeth, from now on, I'm going to call this 5 hard problems, with reference to what you said. And I think that this conference is incredibly well timed. I think IDSS is in great position to deal with the set of issues you're covering today. Doron said to you very clearly that the way we make progress with any question like this is with good theory, precise theory, and good econometrics. With all due respect to all the people in the room who worked hard on these problems, including the Office of Financial Research, it is very early days, in my view, on these 5 hard problems. The first one, I would say, is why do financial systems fail? Now, there's at least, and you can think about the history of this, and you can go through the narrative in different ways, but I think there's three main ideas or competing hypotheses out there. The first is that there's something wrong with rules and institutions, particularly early in economic development. And Larry Summers gave a great lecture about this in 2000. I completely agree with the lecture at the time. I'm not so much anymore, because his point was rich countries don't have these problems because we've evolved out of them, and we kind of fix it as we get richer and as we get better organized. That doesn't fit well with 2008. There's a fantastic book that you must read called Too Big to Fail, the original Too Big to Fail book by Gary Stern and Ron Feldman of the Minneapolis Fed, that goes through really the economics of what happened subsequently, and they were 5 or even more years ahead of their time. But again, their issue is there's something technical in the sequence of bailouts and the way that creditors are protected that distorts incentives. Now, the third view, which is my view, is the Doron Acemoglu view. Now, I should say that using Doron to comment on Doron is really easy, because he started about 10 different schools of economics and some other non-economic schools. So this is the Doron Acemoglu, Jim Robinson book, Why Nations Fail, another must-read, although you need a week to read it. It's kind of big. But the core idea there is really simple, which is that the nations fail, nations being, I think it's a special type of system here, they fail not because of accidents, not because somebody built some institutions that just happen to be sort of out of sync with the shocks, but very, very much because the rules that running these systems are in the interests of some particular powerful people, and those powerful people either want it to be primed for failure because that's the way they get rich, or when it becomes clear that these structures are vulnerable, they do not want to fix it because this would not be in their self-interest. So I think this is the big question behind everything you're going to talk about today, and I'm in the Acemoglu, that particular Acemoglu camp. Now, turning to some more specific and technical questions, I was at a conference organized by the Minneapolis Fed on Monday, and this was a fascinating question. So the Minneapolis Fed has got a really interesting initiative on Too Big to Fail and have we made progress for what needs to be done. And they assembled a lot of people with widely different views, experts in the room on Monday. And it turned out not only could we not agree on whether or not banks have enough equity, there wasn't agreement in the room about how to measure equity properly for banks. It's astonishing. It's like I would say it's before we get to complicated. Well, actually, it is a little bit complicated, Ron. It's related to your point about netting. The really big argument about banks, bank size, bank equity, quality of equity, do you have enough loss absorption, is about what Doron said, which was how do we measure netting? How do we think about netting in different scenarios, either when there's a complete collapse or when there's just a lot of pressure on the system, right? Now, I have a particular view, and this is my view, which is that you can measure it, not perfectly, but in a reasonably robust way. And if you do that, then equity in the large U.S. banks has increased from before the crisis, when it was about 3 to 4% on average, to now 4 to 5% on average. 5% equity, 95% debt, in my measure, of how you fund the largest banks in the world. So, there's a question. Is that a lot of equity? Is 5% equity in a modern world facing the kind of shocks that you face with the sorts of structures that Doron talked about, is that a lot of equity? My conjecture is no, but, as Doron said, we have to bring more theory and better econometrics to that question. The next one is also quite fascinating and closely related. So this is a picture that the FDIC, so I'm on the FDIC Systemic Resolution Advisory Committee. It's a lot of fun, just like you would think from the name, really good parties and so on. And we have these incredibly abstract discussions about these tail events and what's going to happen when you have to resolve a very large very large financial institutions, $2, $3, $4 trillion total risk exposure. Now, the FDIC draws these. FDIC, I love the FDIC. I think they work incredibly hard on this, and I think the FDIC's resolution on authority under Dodd-Frank will help you in some kinds of situations, like the $100 billion to $500 billion dollar bank and non-banks. But I'm skeptical for the large, complex, global financial institutions. But here's the problem, and here's the analytical problem, and this is where we need theory, and this is where we need people like you guys. So I can easily draw this. This picture looks fine, okay? So this is, I've got some losses. I'm going to wipe out shareholders. I'm going to impose some losses on secured creditors. I'm going to create a new company. I'm going to capitalize that company. I'm going to have some equity, some debt, and I'll give you some contingent liabilities also. So if things go well, you get some upside. That is a very, very easy discussion. Problem solved. Well, not really, right? I mean, this is not how the world works. When something like this fails, it's extremely complex. There's a lot of other things going on. I think Doron put his finger on the key point on this interconnections issue. People talk about interconnections all the time, and what they really mean is either correlated shocks or correlated perceptions, or I just learned something about what's actually happening in these markets, how the regulators are going to react to it, and I'm going to update the value of all other securities when I do that. So the problems we've had with COCOs, for example, in the European banks, if you follow that, it is exactly this. Some people wrote down pictures like this. It seemed all very straightforward. The debt will convert to equity under the following circumstances. It'll be stabilizing. We don't have the good econometrics, right? So we've not reached that Acemoglu standard, which is very important. But based on what we've seen and based on the heuristics, it is not stabilizing. It is destabilizing. And I see a lot of officials actually updating their view on that now, and market people updating their view. So thanks to the Europeans for showing us that, but really we need to nail that much better and much more clearly. Now, this is another fascinating and tough problem. And this actually goes very directly to what Doron was saying and the way he was showing you networks. So, and this is, and by the way, I'm not. As I was writing these slides, I thought this makes me seem a little too obsessed with banks and financial systems. I'm not obsessed with banks. Okay, I am obsessed with banks. I'm also obsessed with other things like non-banks. I just happen to have better pictures on banks, so I have to work on that. This is a graphic of showing you concentration in the U.S. banking system, where the red banks, the red shows you big banks by any reasonable definition over 10 billion. And the green and yellow and blue are smaller banks. And so this shows you the rising share of total assets in the hands of the largest financial institutions. Not a controversial picture. So the question comes up a lot, and it was articulated very nicely by Doron just now, which is, as a system becomes, well, sorry, I think it's a subset of what you said, Doron, that as a system becomes more centralized, as I have these stronger individual institutions, or larger individual institutions with more diversification within the firm, right, which is absolutely what they say they have, and seems many times it's true, does that improve my system resilience and stability or not? Now, prior to 2008, I think there was consensus, certainly across all the officials I worked with. I was the chief economist at the IMF in 2007 until August 2008. And certainly we went into the crisis, and most of our G7 counterparts, all our G7 counterparts went into the crisis thinking that the big banks were a source of strength and resilience to the system. It wasn't true. We'll send the slides around, don't worry. Yes, samizdat photographs of them will probably increase the impact, but the slides are on the website. So why is this? Why do the large financial institutions not turn out to be a source of stability, but actually a source of instability? I have a number of conjectures about that, and one of them is absolutely about the nature of herding. So people say, for example, if you break up the big banks into smaller banks, you get the same problem or maybe a worse problem because they'll all herd. Well, perhaps, but actually the amount of herding, and certainly hedge funds notoriously herd under some circumstances, but the amount of herding that we saw from the hedge funds in 2000, that was manifest or brought under pressure in 2008, 2009, was not system destabilizing. It's the herding by the large players, a few big guys really copying each other. All five big investment banks, so-called investment banks at that time, were herding pretty badly. The large banks were also herding to a large degree, perhaps not quite so much. I just think we need to understand this, and I think this question of is bigger better, is bigger more stable, under what conditions? How would you know? How can you measure that in real time? We don't know. We don't know the answer. We don't know the answer to this. Now, here's my last slide, and here's a great question. By the way, for all future speakers, I got to tell you, the box that Elizabeth's using to monitor your timing is enormous here, and anything that uses enormous technology in the modern world is really scary. Everyone else is using an iPhone, Elizabeth, at this point, okay? Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm watching it carefully. So, it's kind of like that with the MetLife decision, right? So I know a lot of people in the industry are very excited about the MetLife decision. Yes, we won one against the government. Fantastic. We're fighting about regulation and so on. Well, I would be very careful with this from a political but also an analytical point of view. So this is the picture here, my illustration is credit default swap spreads during the crisis. The red line is, and this is for the largest financial institutions in the US, the red one is what was the worst, who had the highest risk of default according to the market, and the blue one is the median. Now, AIG was not believed to be or perceived to be systemically important. But, for those of you who remember living through it, or if you go back and read chapter 12 of Ben Bernanke's memoir, it's a very good and I think extremely honest book. They knew that Lehman failing was going to be a disaster. That's what he says, and I think that's completely plausible. What they didn't know, what they didn't anticipate, at least maybe not until that weekend, was AIG's exposure and the knock-on effects of that, including to money market funds and so on. So, I think that just saying there's no problem here, no systemic problem here, can't possibly be, we're not even going to show you the data, you can't come in and have a look. It's not the smartest strategy on the part of the industry. I mean, I think if you want to take this on, you should get together. You can do it privately. You can do it with MIT. You can do it yourselves. I think you should be looking for ways to measure systemic risk, particularly things that are not completely obvious, particularly contingencies that are not being currently monitored. I think you should get ahead of those. I think there's plenty of analytical capability in the room. I think the issue that we're actually stuck on a little bit more drawn is the empirics. I think we need very high quality empirical work. A lot of the good data here is proprietary. Firms don't like to share it. I understand that, but I think from an understanding where are the hidden risks, where are the risks that we're not measuring and understanding properly, this is really in the interest of everybody in the room to get this right. And you can make a lot more progress without the regulation. I accept that. But if you don't make the progress, or if you put your efforts into fighting the regulation, I don't think you're going to win, honestly. I think the MetLife decision will be overturned, and the FSOC will redesignate them, because if they don't, then they've given up on all of shadow banking, and the entire legal right to pursue risks out of the banking system or beyond the banking system into the non-banks hinges on winning this decision. But more broadly, analytically, I think there's just fantastic questions to look at, great papers to be written, but also much better risk management to arise out of this, and much better policy. And maybe, in the end, if we get a really strong understanding of this, but it has to be really strong, perhaps we can step back a little bit from some of the regulation, and perhaps we can, you can think about capital requirements or other parts of regulation being less onerous. But until we figure out this, until we understand, where we don't have a good measure of the systemic risk, where these things can really come rear up and get us in an unexpected fashion on a massive global scale, you are going to face much higher capital requirements, a push for more capital in the bigger financial institutions, absolutely, and the whole issue of living wills and whether anybody has a plausible living will in today's world, I think is going to remain absolutely on the table. And honestly, if the Federal Reserve and the FDIC were pushing you hard on living wills, you'd have to make a lot more changes to financial firms in the banking system and in the non-banking system. Thank you very much.